Hello, Secret Korshian here. I'm going to be doing a series of talks about what I consider silly laws. And one of the reasons is that if you agree with me, you might want to call your congresspeople and see if you can get some of these laws repealed. But I am not basing it on my emotion, or at least I'm trying not to, that's always a factor, as much as just basing it on what I call principles that makes a law silly. And if a law actually falls within one of these principles, it might be sort of stupid and we might want to do away with it. Now there will be places where people will disagree, but I think if you follow the principles, you'll find out that they're pretty reasonable and logical, which makes things nice. The first principle that we're going to look at is what I call unenforceable laws. Are there laws on the books, or have there been laws on the books, that really were virtually impossible to enforce? One would be a law that is a thought law, that you're not allowed to think a certain way or believe a certain way. And the reason that is sort of silly is people can always lie about what they believe or how they think. Many, many years ago in Europe, there were laws that usually had to do with religion that you had to believe a certain way or you couldn't believe a certain way. And if a person wanted to stay alive, all they had to do, or stay out of trouble, all they had to do was say that, no, I don't believe that way, I believe the way you want me to. Christianity, there was a time when it would go after people that weren't Christians, and Islam did the same thing, and maybe even political thought and that kind of thing. It's sort of a silly law. I don't believe we have any of that in our country today. But another one is that we did have in Texas, which was really, really silly, was an anti-sodomy law. And it said that married people could not have unnatural sex acts in the privacy of their own home. Now, how in the world you'd ever detect that legally, I wouldn't know. And so eventually they repealed it, and they also had a law that if you weren't married, you couldn't have sex. And again, that was sort of hard to be able to prove unless somebody got pregnant. And of course, there were laws against homosexual acts, which again, if people are doing it in the privacy of their own home, it's really unenforceable. So that's the kind of law that I mean when I'm talking about. If we still have laws like that you really can't prove or find out what's going on, why is it on the book? One other too that's unenforceable is the law against committing suicide. What are you going to do to somebody if they succeeded? Now, maybe you could have a law against attempting it, but against doing it is sort of silly. Another principle behind the law that makes it a silly law is, does it go against the popular feeling of the society? And usually these tend to be morality laws. But there is a point when if nobody really thinks that it's wrong to do something, that maybe you shouldn't have a law. And a perfect example in our country historically was prohibition. We had decided that it was wrong to drink, it was immoral, and so they actually made a constitutional amendment that said that you're not allowed to drink. Alcohol is what I'm talking about there. And so they passed the law, and for a lot of reasons, that law had some serious problems with it, but eventually, pretty much it was ignored. Everybody was drinking, including the people that were supposed to be enforcing the law. They were just all doing it illegally. And so it got to the point, because of other problems, that the law was repealed. Two other examples, one you could say is from the left and one's from the right, so sort of throwing both out there. Is one on same-sex marriage. There was a time when it was insane to think that somebody of the same sex would get married. But as time has gone on, the population, for whatever reason, and you can decide why you think that is, has come more and more to the point to saying there's nothing wrong with that. So what you're seeing is across the country, slowly this law is being repealed. And what will be the end results will be how popular or unpopular the law may be. Now, on the other side is citizen carry. There used to be laws all across the country saying that, a, 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 really strong reason to be able to carry a gun concealed or in some cases unconcealed. But as time has gone on, and again, you can come up with the various reasons that you want to talk about on it, the people at large have more and more, and in Texas really for sure, have gotten to the point that they don't see anything wrong with a citizen being able to do that. It was a very unpopular law, and so it was repealed. Looking at the laws today, if you want to stay with the gun issue, Texas is looking at open carry. Can a person carry a gun or a pistol when you can actually see it? And how that goes will depend, but if the vast majority of people are in favor of a person being able to do that, then it's a silly law and it needs to be repealed. Now, like I say, we can have discussion on whether it's how the people feel about it. That's a different issue. Another law that I would consider, another principle for a law being considered a silly law, is it responsive? In other words, does the law do what it says it will do? And again, in Texas, we have a past example. Ever since I was a little bitty kid, maybe even before I was born, and that was a long time ago, it was illegal for anybody but the police or certain military people to be able to carry a switchblade knife. A switchblade knife is a knife, you push a button and the blade comes out. And the reasoning behind it, I assume, was to stop knifings and that kind of thing. The law really wasn't doing anything, because I know when I was a kid, I lived in San Antonio, and every night there was somebody knifing somebody, and I don't believe it was with a switchblade, but still they were. But even more conducive for it being silly or non-responsive is much later, in I think it was in the 90s, late 90s, they came out with something called a spring-assisted knife. And by the time the legislature caught on to the fact that this was very similar to a switchblade, farmers, construction workers, everyday Joes had started buying the knife and found it very, very handy to be able to open a knife with one hand while you're doing something else with your other hand. So that when they tried to even think about making that illegal, they weren't going to go anywhere with it. And then just last year, and a lot of y'all don't know this, but just last year the Texas legislature realized this was really a silly law. So now, because it was not responsive, it wasn't doing anything except keeping people from having switchblades, and so they repealed it, and the common man can now own a switchblade if they so desire to do so. Another reason a law or a principle that would make a law a silly law is if there are unintended consequences that makes things worse instead of better. The two examples I'm going to give you, I don't know, they're sort of debatable to a degree, but if they are in fact true, what some people say, they would definitely meet the criteria. One was the airbag law when it first came out. Mary Meyer, a university professor, did a study, and according to her information, that there were actually more deaths and injuries caused because of the airbag than the good that it did in the lives it saved, because everybody still should be wearing seatbelts, of course. If that was true, and that people were actually being killed because of a law that was put on the books to protect them or make them less likely to get hurt, then that had unintended consequences. Now, that was a while back when the study was done. I'm sure that airbags have gone through a number of different changes, but it's something you need to look at. And if it does cause more harm than good, then you want to repeal the law. The other one is immunization laws. Now, there's no law in the country except that the schools have rules or laws that you can't go to the schools unless you have your immunizations. And of course there are people that can't afford private schools or homeschooling or other alternatives. So basically for them it is a law. They have to have their children immunized. Whereas most people, and I would be included amongst those, that believe that immunization is a good thing, there are unintended consequences to it. Kids do get sick, sometimes quite bad. There's some argument about autism or not due to shots, but in any case, that if it does harm people more than it does good, or if it harms anybody at all, should they have to get shots? I would say no, and it should be repealed. Realize that if that law, if kids could go to school without their immunizations, another parent would give their child the immunizations or get them for them, and so really it's not going to affect their child. The child that's going to be affected is one that doesn't get the immunizations. But those are two examples, and like I say, I don't know how good they are, but there are laws that once they're on the book, they actually do cause more harm and damage, and if you believe a law is like that, then you darn sure want to try to get it appealed. The last general principle that would make a law a silly law is it unconstitutional. If the law is in fact unconstitutional, it's just going to be stated as such, and then it's no longer there. It was a waste of money or time. So if you think a law is unconstitutional, you probably ought to make sure that it gets repealed, or you don't even want it passed in the first place. The problem with unconstitutional laws is how do you interpret the Constitution, and anybody that's been paying attention is that depending on what side of an issue you're on, there seems to be more politics even with the judges nowadays than there was in the past. I don't know if that's true, but that's the problem. What is constitutional or unconstitutional? But if you think a law is unconstitutional, then you should work very hard on appealing it. And one of the laws I'll be talking about, which the Supreme Court did declare constitutional, though I still say that in my mind it is forfeiture and seizure laws, and that will be a law that I will be talking about in the future and give you my reasoning why I think it's unconstitutional and how I think that issue could be handled. But one of the things we would be trying to do is get it repealed. Now, these are general principles, and what I'm trying to get you to do is when you look at the law, think that way and see does it fit in there. And if the law fits into one of these principles, it's probably silly, and it should be gotten rid of. There is one class of laws that I do want to talk about that is going to be much more philosophical oriented, but there are some points that I can bring up about it, and that is what I would call victimless crime laws. The first thing we need to think about is what is a victimless crime, and that can be debatable. I would suggest that it's when the individual is the one that receives the consequences directly of his or her behavior. Always, if you have people that love you, if you have people that are dependent upon you, if bad things happen to you, you could say that, and it therefore harms them, then it's not victimless. But if that's the case, then virtually nothing is going to be a victimless crime. So I would like to say it's a crime that directly harms the individual. He gets or she gets the consequences, and other people not so much. And it's going to be a philosophical thing. And here's what the two philosophical issues or points you need to look at. One is how much do you believe in freedom? Freedom of choice, freedom to make decisions and suffer the consequences for them. And the other one is to what degree do you believe it's the responsibility of the state to take care of people and protect them from themselves in regard to safety or health issues. And depending on where you go on that spectrum is going to have a lot to do with what you have to say about what is a victim or victimless crime, or whether it's a silly or not a silly law.